Today's webinar is about tangible progress for intangible. And intellectual assets such as ownership and access rights have a key role to play in knowledge valorization and have a strong potential to benefit society when properly used and managed. The speakers of this webinar will demonstrate their innovative practices on how to improve access to and smart use of IP. The changing policy landscape places emphasis on widening the group of stakeholders involved in knowledge valorization and encourages a stronger and more strategic collaboration between the actors. The two presentations you're about to hear showcase two best practices that build on strong intangible intellectual assets and represent a great example of how different actors working together can make tangible progress in commercializing intangible assets. We are going to have, as Manon said, a short Q&A session at the end of each presentation, so I also encourage you to submit your questions through Slido. And let me invite our first speaker, Mrs. Lotta Partanen, to switch on her microphone. Lotta is the manager of the VTT LaunchPad, which is a deep tech incubator combining research, technology, mentors, and investors. It's an in-house business incubator of VTT, Technical Research Center of Finland, one of Europe's leading research institutions. VTT LaunchPad aims at creating fundable spin-off companies and transforming them into bold science-driven companies building on technologies developed by the researchers of VTT. They bring together people, business, science, and technology to solve the biggest challenges of our time. Lotta joined VTT LaunchPad in 2019. She's a graduate of the University of Art and Design Helsinki and also has a professional certificate in foresight from the University of Houston. She gained experience at Philips, Nokia, and the Internal Innovation Accelerator of Fortum. But above all, she describes herself as an innovation designer. So Lotta, I invite you to give your presentation. You have about 10 minutes, and I will give you a signal when you have 2 minutes left.
Thank you. So you've done a really great job of doing a quick introduction there. So we can move to the next slide. I joined VTT indeed in 2019, and I joined VTT to found this spin-off incubator, VTT LaunchPad. And then, as an innovation designer and as an innovation leader, one of my greatest challenges is to help teams build the right it and really be very conscientious of what should be done right now before we do anything else. And I'm a strong believer when it comes to innovation in market decision, where we can see the fittest survive. So in that sense, I'm not a great fan of that sort of juries making the decision when there's no money involved. So let the team show what they're good at and how well they survive, and then let's see if they can secure the funding. Good. So we can move to the next slide, a little bit about VTT. Many of you probably know VTT. This year, we've existed for 80 years, founded in 1942. Currently, there are some 2,000 plus employees. Nearly 1/3 of us have a doctorate in something. And we're quite an international company owned by the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment of Finland. So in that sense, we have that state steering as part of our work, which means that actually one of those great drivers for our decision making is impact. Good. We can move to the next slide. So when we talk about that impact, as a science startup incubator, that is one of our tasks, is to live VTT's mission and bring together the people, business, science, and technology in order to bring that impact about, really drive for impact, creating sustainable growth, jobs, and well-being. Very good. We can move to the next slide. Thanks. So we are committed to develop fundable spin-off ventures, again, with that great impact in mind. And we create value by investing VTT-owned IPR into growth companies. And our major, our driving KPI, if our owner has several kind of key performance indicators for VTT's performance, when it comes to the spin-off activities, it is the amount of capital investment attracted by our spin-off companies annually. And that is for the ones that have now just right now spun off, but also the ones that have spun off a few years ago. Thanks. So then, what I found, it's really important for us to kind of collaborate across borders with our kind of peer companies, peer research institutions. And what I've realized is it's really important to get the terms right, so that we know what we're talking about. So I think it's really important always to start with okay, so what's your definition of a spin-off? Good, because they're very different from country to country, from company to company, research institute to research institute. So our definition is, of a spin-off is that it is a company, a growth company that VTT has invested its own IPR into in kind in exchange of preferred shares alongside with the capital investors. Now the IPR then has been clearly specified and valued by a third party before the investment. And our target is always win-win-win. We're really looking forward to spinning off really capable spin-off companies with the best possible kind of growth trajectory, with the best sort of kind of funding, and then that we get a kind of a fair deal out of it. So our target is between 5 and 10% of ownership of the startup in the beginning. So that is after the first investment round. Good. So the way we've been working at VTT now is for the past 3 years, we've been trying to figure out how is it that we best work inside of VTT in order to kind of facilitate our researchers on the spin-off path. So we started something called the Commercialization Workshop, open to all VTTers last year. And actually right now we're kind of about to begin our third round of it. And this is for exploring commercialization opportunities for the kind of long-term vision, building that, and then really building the team in order to then, for example, secure funding such as the research business funding from Business Finland. And so you need to do that preparation work, and then we can offer support for that application, and then for building the team around it and the advisory board. And then there's the incubation program that once you have secured that funding, you can join the incubator. However, you don't need to secure that funding. If you want to kind of faster route out, you can just apply for our funding. Very good. We can move on. And then really, talk of one of the great challenges that we've had is to get our colleagues to think big. Now, Finland, I think as a nation, we have a tendency of, being rather humble, and we should be more humble. So less humble in this sense. Let's be, more bold at dreaming what is the magnificent global impact that we can create with this technology in 10 years' time. And then we can do backcasting 3 years from now. Where should we be in order to be on that 10-year track? Good. And then we can go ahead and now think of, at this point, what should we do in the coming year in order to get on that path? Who should I have on my team, and who should be helping me in order to get there? And then, now we're really trying to get all our incubation candidates to think about that, and really answer these questions before they actually start looking for any funding to go forward. And then it would be great if we got our colleagues across VTT also thinking about this. And why not nationwide? Wouldn't that be fantastic? Dream of a better world and start planning for it. Great. So in practice, our incubation program, in order to enter it, there are 5 criteria that we really demand. The IPR must be owned by VTT, and it must be something that we can spin off. There naturally has to be also, with the previous slide in mind, be impressive market potential and must be scalable. There must be that positive impact for and benefit for society and, of course, especially the customer. The technology must be demonstrated. And finally, the team does not need to be ready yet, but it needs to be a team that can be developed into a fundable team. And then the following elements are the ones that we have in the program. We can, if they're not going for the research and business funding, we also have internal funding for the teams, and altogether that could be even up to 1 million euros before founding a company. We offer coaching and training for entrepreneurship. Then there's all sorts of contacts facilitated between investors, different kinds of partners, mentors, and so forth. Active team development is really important for us. And then, of course, the active IPR development. And if we look at then,
you have about 2 minutes left.
2 minutes, fantastic. So VTT does not only invest its IPR into our own spin-offs, we also invest it into other growth companies. So here in the past 2.5 years, we've made 8 investments of IPR, and the column on the left-hand side is our own spin-offs, and then the column on the right-hand side are then those that we have invested that come from outside of VTT. And I think then, just a quick glance of what we've spun off so far, and that's the final slide. So Enifer Bio is the first one, Volare, Coolie Blade, and then Onego Bio. And coincidentally, I think it's a hot topic right now. 3 out of these are in producing proteins. So that's a curious one. And then Coolie Blade, thermal management. Very good. So, happy to open the floor for questions, and let's connect.
Thank you, Lotta, for your presentation. It was really interesting to see this initiative. And let me start by the questions. The first question is, are there other IPRs other than patents typically considered to create a spin-off via the LaunchPad?
Yes. So it's basically what we're looking at is something, for example, know-how that has been documented, that is substantial, it's unique, and it has not been disclosed previously, so it's secret. That's something that can be considered as something that we could be spinning off and investing. Or it can be materials like microbial strains, it can be prototypes, trademarks, or software.
Okay. And have you considered IP to be used as collateral or debt guarantee in the spin-outs?
So we don't give out, if I understand the kind of question correctly, we don't give out loans. So an IP, it has probably a kind of a proper value only once it's been applied in the market. So it might be difficult to use it as collateral. So what we really prefer is just to transfer it into a startup, or then if they don't get that right kind of funding yet, make a kind of a temporary licensing deal before transferring it.
Okay. And you mentioned those 5 criteria to spin out a company. What happens if you meet only 4?
Maybe some things we can help you out with. The team, perhaps, we could help you out with, or we could work on that market potential. Maybe it wasn't identified yet properly, but then you need a flexible team in order to be willing to do that. However, when it comes to the IPR, it's non-negotiable.
I understand. Thank you, Lotta. I ask you to switch off your camera, and I will call you back for the final round of Q&A.
Thank you.
And allow me to invite our next speaker, Mr. Esteban Burrone, to switch on his camera. Esteban is the head of policy at the Medicines Patent Pool, which is a public health organization backed by the United Nations. Its goal is to increase access to and facilitate the development of life-saving medicines for low and middle-income countries through its innovative business model. Medicines Patent Pool partners with civil society, governments, international organizations, industry, patent groups, and other stakeholders to prioritize and license needed medicines and pool intellectual property to encourage the generic manufacture and the development of new formulations. Esteban contributed to the setting up of Medicines Patent Pool in 2010, and as head of policy, he works on partnerships with a large number of organizations and stakeholders, including governments, intergovernmental organizations, and civil society organizations. Esteban, I invite you to give your presentation. You have about 10 minutes, and I will give you a signal when you have 2 minutes left.
Thank you very much, Andras. Can you hear me well? Yeah?
Yes, we hear you well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So yes, this is going to be quite a different kind of experience and organization than what was just presented by Lotta. We're an organization that works also on the licensing of intellectual property rights, but our objectives are very much to achieve public interest goals, and in particular, supporting public health outcomes in low and middle income countries. So we move on to the next slide. Just to give you a little bit of background on the organization itself, I'll split this presentation in two parts. First one, tell you a little bit about the story of the MPP, of the organization, and what we've been able to achieve until now. And then the second part, briefly tell you about experience that we're now working on, and it's quite new stream of work with universities and public research organizations. Excuse me. So starting with a Medicines Patent Pool core activity. We've set up back in 2010, so we're relatively recent, been around for about 12 years. What we try to do is striking licensing agreements with innovators in the pharmaceutical space who have medicines that could be particularly important for scale up in low and middle income countries, and that for a variety of reasons may not be available, affordable in those countries. And therefore, using licensing as a mechanism to facilitate that access and bringing in generic manufacturers who can make those products available in such countries, which are generally not the main commercial markets for the pharmaceutical industry or for the innovator pharmaceutical industry. And at times also, through our licenses, also facilitating further innovation, so adaptation, new formulations of existing medicines, for example, pediatric medicines or new fixed dose combinations that combine more than one active ingredient into a single pill. We started back in 2010 working on HIV specifically to test a model to see whether there's something that could work, where the pharmaceutical industry would be willing to engage with us. Over time, expanded into other therapeutic areas, hepatitis C, tuberculosis, other essential medicines, and most recently, of course, COVID-19. I'll speak a little bit about that in a minute. Next slide. So this gives you a little bit of a sense of the operating model. Start with identification of key medicines, which are those medicines that can really make a difference in low and middle income countries. And they're working very closely with the World Health Organization and a whole range of experts. Once that happens, we start engagement with the industry, with the pharmaceutical companies that hold the intellectual property rights on those medicines. Of course, when we're negotiating, we're doing that from a public health perspective. Our mission is public health. So we're not a profit-driven entity, we're a non-profit. And that kind of changes quite a bit the way we approach that kind of discussion, that kind of negotiation. If we succeed in getting a license that works for all parties, at that stage we open it up, we issue a call for what do we call expression of interest. So we're calling on manufacturers interested in making generic versions for the supply of low and middle income countries. And particularly the countries that have been defined in the territory of the in-license from the innovator. Once we do that, we work with the manufacturers and with a whole range of partners on the ground to make sure that the product doesn't just end up in a license, but really reaches all the way down to the last mile to the people who need it. And that is significant work. So even though the most visible one is usually when we get that license, what really makes a difference is taking this all the way down to the people who need the drug. Next slide. And so you see here another way of thinking about our model where MPP really acts as an intermediary, a public health intermediary with a whole range of different principles that are listed here. Our licenses are non-exclusive, they're transparent, but public health driven. That's really critical. And they're targeting the specific product that we're engaged in. So there's not a standard template license. It really is bespoke and depending on the specifics of each case. Next slide. In terms of impact that we've managed to have through this through this initiative, recently published a paper in the Lancet Public Health, which captures that in the numbers you can see here. So through the licenses that we've already negotiated, we expect approximately 170,000 deaths averted by 2030. This is in HIV and hepatitis C, and doesn't even count the work that we're doing now on COVID or other therapeutic areas. So quite a significant impact. It's been 18.55 billion doses of treatment supplied in 148 countries. So it's really over time, and particularly over the last few years, where many of the products that we licensed a few years back have now entered the market, are really making a massive difference and reaching a lot of people. Next slide. These are the innovators that we work with. You'll recognize, I'm sure, many of the leading pharmaceutical companies, mostly of those that are highly active in the HIV space and hepatitis C, and then gradually as we're moving into new areas. You also recognize at the bottom two of the COVID treatments that we've licensed in. These are two antivirals, molnupiravir and nirmatrelvir. They're very recent products, and we have licenses in place with Merck, MSD, and Pfizer on these antivirals, which are still becoming available right now in high-income countries, and very rapidly, hopefully, will also be becoming available in low and middle-income countries at prices that will be suitable for those contexts. Next slide. So once we have the innovators on one side, then we have the licensees on the other, which are the generic companies that we work with, and you see here them listed in terms of the geographical spread of those licensees. Next slide. So the second part of what I wanted to talk to you about is, so if this is what we've been doing traditionally as our licensing work in relation to pharmaceuticals with primarily the pharmaceutical industry, but also in a few cases, universities and public research organizations. Over the past couple of years, we've also started venturing into more intense activity with some universities and public research organizations. And I want to talk to you about that. Now, why are we doing that? We're doing that because access to new health products remains a challenge, and many new products that are coming to market remain out of reach in low and middle income countries, even though they could have a massive health impact. At times they're available, but they're not affordable to the majority. And what we do see is that the initial innovations, or even the initial patents that led to those breakthrough treatments or breakthrough health products originated in universities or public research organizations. And such universities and public research organizations often have a very strong public interest mandate. So it's very much part of the mission of those entities to promote the public interest in various ways. But as we started discussing with the Law of Tech Transfer Office, we came to realize that often, while that's in the mission statement and may even appear in some of the policies that the organizations aim to implement, the actual licensing agreements often had very little in terms of actual binding language that would make a difference in terms of supporting that affordable access in low and middle income countries. So we really saw as an opportunity to try and engage with the community of universities and public research organizations to see whether we could become something that could try and fulfill that public interest mandate, while at the same time still ensuring that the technologies do get developed and commercialized, and that the requirements are not such that they could have a chilling effect on venture capitalists or biotechs, etc. Next slide. So one example of what we've been working with, we've worked quite a bit with the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, and they're really trying to explain how can we find that right balance and engage with stakeholders on the industry side, on the venture capitalist side, and also with some of the student groups, activists, and civil society groups that had concerns about subsequent affordability of the products that were coming out of that university. So what we came to is a series of provisions that get included now in licensing agreements, which are non-prescriptive. They don't say exactly how the affordable access is meant to happen in low and middle income countries, but it commits the licensee to develop a plan within 3 months of approval of that product. So if that product originally licensed for university 6, 8, 10 years later makes it to FDA approval, for example, and becomes a pharmaceutical product, within 3 months of that, there needs to be an affordable access plan for low and middle income countries. And that's now it gets incorporated into the licenses, and that really enable that discussion with the with the licensee, with the company that's taking this technology forward to explore what that may be the most appropriate mechanism. That may be licensing via the MPP, but not necessarily. There could be, of course, many other ways through which that technology may become available in low middle income countries affordably. But there needs to be a clear plan in place. And I think that's something that was important, while at the same time being non-prescriptive, so that it leaves a lot of leeway in terms of how that can happen. Next slide. And this has been implemented by a few universities now. We started one university, there's more than one that now have implemented these kinds of provisions in a whole range of different therapeutic areas. So you see here some examples of types of technologies for which this kind of language has been utilized. What's interesting is that it really has been accepted by pharmaceutical companies, by venture capitalists, by biotech companies. So the initial concern that if we put language on access early on, that could, have a chilling effect, that hasn't really materialized in the cases we've seen, and that's kind of been very interesting. Of course, we still have to wait a few years until those technologies reach the market and the actual implementation of those provisions become a reality. Next slide. Well, this just gives you
I have about 2 minutes left.
Well, this is really my last slide. So I'm just going to show this is the actual language for the lawyers that might be following the actual language of what gets included into agreements. But this, of course, can be needs to be looked at in a lot more detail. If you're able to go back to the previous slide, there's a link there at the bottom. Here we go. That where you can find out more about the specific work we've done with UCLA, but then replicating that in relation to a few other universities. And of course, we're more than happy to explore similar discussions and opportunities with other universities or public research organizations in Europe. If you can go a couple of more slides, move on, and then I think it's the last one. No, just keep on going on. Yeah, so I think it's a thank you slide. Though you see my email. I'm really available to interact with people, with organizations that might be willing to explore these approaches, both industry that might have products that they're developing and they're struggling to put in place policies that can ensure affordability, affordable access in low and middle income countries, as well as universities and public research organizations that are developing early stage technology, and they want to make sure that if that technology does work out, that there won't be challenges in terms of access in the poorest countries in the world. So that's the experience I wanted to share with you. I'm very open to hear questions and discussion. Thank you very much, Andras.
Thank you, Esteban. Amazing incentive, amazing results. And my first question is, which are the most active stakeholder groups in this initiative? Because I understand you work with a lot of stakeholders.
Yeah, I think it's an initiative that really relies on very strong collaboration across a whole range of stakeholders. And I think this is really what's made a difference. That is a collaborative initiative. And I think we definitely have to work very closely with the industry, with the innovator industry and the generic industry. We also need to work with governments, because ultimately the treatments often need to be bought by governments. So unless we do that engagement, it's not the license on its own is not going to generate access. And it's the patient groups who are often the ones calling and asking and demanding that those treatments reach them. So we have to engage very closely with them as well. And with the World Health Organization, who's also at the normative level looking at which are the priorities. And so we're engaging. So it really is set up as a collaborative mechanism in an area that traditionally or historically has often been quite polarized in the issue around intellectual property and access to treatments in low and middle income countries, with the early days of HIV, etc. And the idea was really try to move beyond that and try to find a collaborative approach that could work for all parties.
I see. And speaking of industry, what incentives do you offer to companies to partner up with you?
I think the main incentive is that we're a credible way to make health technology that's critical in countries that are of very limited commercial interest, to make it available in those countries. I think there is a lot of demand on the industry to behave responsibly and to yes, of course, make the profits needed to further invest in research and development, but at the same time take into consideration the challenges in many parts of the world, in many settings. And therefore, that's probably one of the most important ones, the credible mechanism to make that happen that does not impact on their bottom line or on their core business. At the same time, of course, there are royalties flowing back to the industry, and there's a number of other, depending on each company, incentives that they will see in collaborating with us.
And beyond monetary benefits, what do you think are the other additional benefits and value that companies see in partnering up with you?
I think at the core of it, it's I think the pharmaceutical industry and the people who are working in the pharmaceutical industry and are developing these groundbreaking treatments want to make sure that people who need it get it. But at the same time, there's also this challenging commercial reasons why that may not always be the easiest path. So what we're offering is exactly a way to make that happen, and a credible way with a proven track record, and work, and taking care of that part, which is critical from a global perspective, but may not have the same commercial promise that would enable that kind of. So it's really kind of bringing everybody together to enable, to bridge the public health needs with the industry needs and find something that can address both.
I see. Thank you. And in what other fields do you think an initiative like the Medicines Patent Pool could be successful? And what do you think is the success factor in your case?
Well, I think as the initiative started off, initially just working on HIV treatments, very concrete and specific initiative. Gradually, we got called upon to explore operating a model in other areas, and most notably recently in COVID-19. And we got to be careful, that there are specificities in each area. There's specificities to HIV, there's specificities to treatments, there's specificities. Now we were beginning to look into working into biologics. It's quite different from the small molecules we've worked on before. So as you move into new areas, you can't just apply a copy and paste model that will work. I think there's a significant adaptation needed. We're now collaborating with WHO on a few diagnostic technologies potentially. There's some vaccine work going also led by WHO. Each one of these is really very specific. And we need to be careful not to think that because something's worked in relation to one area that it could be adapted to others. So part of success factor, I would say, really doing your homework in terms of understanding the specific space and adapting the approach to the specific technologies and to the specific problem you're trying to solve. Are you trying to solve a problem of affordability? Are you trying to solve a problem of access and availability? Or is it a problem of local production? Is it supply security? Is it increasing manufacturing? What problem are you trying to solve, or further innovation that's not happening and that's needed? And given that, trying to tailor the tool to those different scenarios.
Thank you. And the next question is for Lotta. Lotta, do you monitor the success of spin-off companies created through LaunchPad? And if yes, how and for how long?
Yes, that's what we call the famous KPI 8 that our owners monitor us with. So that's the per year, the amount of investor money that our spin-offs have attracted. So I think last year, I didn't get the final figure yet. I think it was around 100 million euros.
I see. And you mentioned that a team has to have a lot of things in place in order to have a successful spin-out company. Or which one do you think is the most difficult to put together? Which criteria is the most difficult to meet?
The team.
And how can you support innovators and researchers to put a team together?
Yeah. So that's something that anyone in the audience, please be in touch if you have kind of insights on this. We're trying out different types of things. So for example, if the team is missing, I'll start with the easy ones. If they're missing some sort of a capability, we can try to find that. Then we can, we have a very quick process, if we find an individual, I can hire that person hopefully the project has budget for that. If not, I can figure that out. So we don't need to burden the research organization at all. Typically, it's been kind of a entrepreneur residence type of a role for a commercialization champion. However, we've had a data analyst in the team, so we've been flexible with that. However, then, the team dynamic is, of course, what we're looking at. So initially, we start with kind of a HR-led program. There's a psychologist in our HR team who helps with, has kind of mentoring sessions with the teams. And then towards the end, when we see that the team might really be spinning off, then we can organize this sort of startup culture or company culture training for those teams to really start thinking of the ins and outs of working as a team and how do you start actually developing, that human side of your company. Yeah.
And what would be your advice to other public research organizations who wish to implement a similar LaunchPad or similar initiative as yours?
Mm-hmm. All right, so 3 years behind us, so we don't have all the learnings yet. We have incremental learnings. As of course, you all know, science-based startups take quite a long time to incubate. I'd say one thing is that, I have really enjoyed seeing the survival of the fittest. So we've taken in all the teams that fit the criteria, despite of what kind of advisory juries say. Surprising teams manage to secure their funding and fly out. So not at face value, but really look at, delivery. How are they delivering against the targets? Good. So, and then the other one is, the sort of win-win-win. I hear about kind of licensing deals for startups of what we've done in the past that were not favorable for the startups, or I hear from the outside world. So we're really looking at a deal where, okay, VTT is proud of the value that we create, so we're not giving it out for free. However, we're looking for deals that allow for the startup to really set off on a growth path and secure the best kind of funding possible. So that's sort of win-win-win and willingness to negotiate and find that.
I see. Thank you. And the next question is to Esteban. Do you think that predefined agreements with academic institutions would be a booster for MPP?
I think that could be potentially an option. I mean, I think what we've the experience I've been sharing previously was about predefined provisions that could be introduced into licensing agreements from universities to the people who are actually going to develop that technology further. Because being in the pharmaceutical space, of course, what's coming out of university or public research organization is often very early stage and requires quite a bit of further development. And so this is the way we've seen it. But of course, if universities want to explore the possibility of having predefined agreements, so we think usually it makes sense to tailoring agreements to specific technologies, because we do think that there are specificities that are very relevant. But we have a range of different agreements that we've already done with various organizations that can be used as starting points. And by the way, all our license agreements are actually public on our website. We have a very strong transparency policy as part of our public interest mandate, so they can all be looked at by anybody in the audience.
Yes, that's great. And the same question to you as well. How do you measure success, and for how long you follow these license agreements and these initiatives? Esteban, this is a question to you. So how do you measure success, and for how long do you measure success, and how do you follow these projects that you put in place?
Well, I think ultimately the success was a bit what I was showing in the Lancet Public Health article that I was showing. I mean, what we want to see is the short-term successes. Of course, getting a license from a leading innovator for a really important drug is potentially a short-term success, but that's not going to make a difference to anybody. So the actual success for an initiative like ours is seeing that license translating over time all the way down to the drug reaching the people that need it. And even better, if we can then look at what public health impact does the fact that that people have access to this new drug have, as to compare to what they might have otherwise had they not been able to access this specific drug. So we really want to, and it took us some time. Only, the first few years we were just measuring the economic savings from being able to get more affordable access to treatments, etc. And it's only last year that we started for the first time trying to measure all the way down to the public health impact, which is, what we really want to see at the end of the day. And so, that I think takes time to kind of get to the KPIs that really matter and make a difference. But I think there are intermediate ones which are important. Making sure that you get that initial license, that the drugs get developed, that the drug gets registered, that the drug, is bought, and then eventually, all the way down to the real impact on the ground.
Very true. And the next question is for both of you, and let's start with Lotta and then Esteban. In these rapidly changing, challenging times that we've been experiencing in the past few years, what do you think the next great challenges for your organizations are?
Well, what comes to the sort of, I have tender indications now, so, I'm curious how it pans out. I have a hunch that at the moment the outside world has really woken up to, our kind of ETT stakeholders, our customers have woken up to a growing need in getting big challenges answered. So they're quite actively turning to us for help, which I find then that the research colleagues are quite busy with their project work. And I think they have less time at their hands to dream of what kind of businesses they might like to have themselves, how to create kind of impact through a startup. So I think we have kind of work to do in activating our colleagues more and somehow resourcing free time for them to think and dream of perhaps companies they might be wanting to create.
Thank you. And Esteban, for MPP, what do you think the next great challenges are?
I think for us, COVID created kind of a massive space of work for us because we were kind of a fit-for-purpose institution. That public health institution was there working closely with WHO. And when COVID came along, it was like, well, how can it contribute to this? And that made us start working a whole range of new areas. In addition to some expansions we had done just before COVID came along, when we were starting to work on the possibility of licensing cancer treatments and diabetes treatment. And so I think right now, the big challenge is consolidating that. Is really trying to say, okay, as you expand as a small organization and you start taking on new challenges, making sure that you deliver on those before you start thinking about, what comes next. And I think there's a lot of moving parts. We're growing very fast with a whole range of new initiatives. As you say, we had 23 manufacturing partners, so generic licensees. Before the pandemic, we're now in 55. So we really have to, is managing a massive range of licenses with a whole range of stakeholders and doing that well and delivering against that. Because if you don't deliver this time, you're not going to get the next one. And so to us, it's really important to take, the management of those licenses extremely seriously.
Well, thank you very much. And I wish you both best of the luck. And it's great to see that there are two initiatives working successfully, building on intangible assets and targeting societal and other challenges. And unfortunately, our time is up. And I would like to thank our speakers, Lotta, Esteban. It was great to have this discussion with you. I would like to thank the viewers for joining us this morning. And I would like to also thank the Commission for organizing this great event. Thank you all, and goodbye. Have a great day.